Hello, kind people. Welcome to the weekly listener recap. I'm not feeling too great at the moment. It's the start of term, and I usually catch a cold at the start of term, and this one is no exception. And so maybe this will be a somewhat shorter video. We're going to talk about this puzzle. It's called Using Better Words, and it's by Paddock. And it is not the first Paddock in this year, which is very unusual for the listener. In fact, we reviewed a Paddock puzzle in either March or April, I can't remember, not that long ago, and it was a great one, and that one came after a very big gap in Paddock puzzles, so maybe it's not, particular. I mean, this is still unusual, but somewhat excused. So I don't think I'm going to add anything, any general words about the setter. I said all that I wanted to say in that video. So let's have a look at this one. This is highly unusual. So the preamble goes like this. Each clue is really 6 clues run together, all for 4-letter answers. For each of A to F, the answers are entered in the 6 2x2 blocks of cells, which form 2 rows of the grid, reading clockwise or anti-clockwise, with a bar placed between the first and last letters. The leftmost entries include first, the rightmost one last, and the rest in no particular order. The added bars will produce a grid with 180-degree symmetry that contains only real words and phrases of at least 3 letters. When I was solving, I actually missed this of at least 3 letters bit, and only realized this was the case sort of halfway through the solve, and that makes life so much easier. After first constructing the grid, I found that the 6 4-letter entries all had a meaning that might be considered unpleasant, so I wrote the G clues for them to make the intended definitions clear. But I still had misgivings, so I changed 1 letter in each of those entries and built the grid seen here. The pairs of original and new letters can form a 12-letter word that could be a subtitle for the puzzle and must be written below the grid. So let's have a look at the clues. So as you can see, in a highly unusual set of clues, there are only 7 entities, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And so instead of, now and then we do get clues, 2 clues in one, side by side, or in case of Paddock's puzzle that I really liked, they were interlinked in that weaving puzzle that I talked briefly about in the previous video. But here it is very much an extension on that. There are 6 clues running together side by side. And of course, I immediately thought about the possibility of just writing one long story of one, where all the clues in the puzzle are going to be in, one paragraph. The other thing that is somewhat unusual is that all the clues are 4-letter long. I think in general, listener editors are not too happy with that, although in 2023, the puzzle that won Asked Gold Cup was by KG, and in that puzzle, all original answers before they were encoded were 4-letter long. So, there are some nice precedents there of puzzles doing very well with just 4-letter answers. So how are we to go about this? Well, if I were to solve it again, I would have made use of the fact that all the entries in the grid that you end up with are at least 3 letters long. And what this means is that this could not be an entry in that grid, and so there has to be a bar there. And because it's symmetric, there has to be a bar there as well. So what this means is that if we manage to solve the first A, note that there are no down clues here or no across clues here. They're all, in some sense, they're all acrosses because the grid is split into this 6 2-row segments, strips. So rage took effect gripping A, and I think here the answer is bait. And so once we get that, we realize that we could either put it, I mean, if we know that this is where the bar is, now we know that it's either this way or the other way around, and there are no other options. And naturally, we sort of have to start with these two columns, because at least for those columns, we know where the words are, where the answers are in these clues. So, for example, here, Warren going round outside submerges houses is a reverse hidden, and it is used. And so again, now, well, here we don't know where the bar goes, right? It could go anywhere. So this is a little bit more tricky, but for example, here again, we know that the bar is here, and so there is one there. And that helps. So this is pretty much what I did. I solved quite a lot of this first and last clues, because in general, the shorter the answers are, the easier the clues get, because there's just combinatorially less possibilities. And so at some point my grid looked like this. And I think I might have missed some. Yeah. No, which one I missed? Dude, yeah, there's a bar here as well. So I solved, and obviously as soon as you place, I mean, if you say solve the first column, then at least you know where the bars are in the last column. And then at some point I made my way through C and D clues, and I managed to organize them in such a way, again with the help of the fact that, you know, there must be a bar here, there must be a bar there, and similarly, you know, there must be a bar there, and there must be hence a bar here. So these bars we can just enter, and that restricts the possibility of placing these entries, and so for like these pairs you only have 4 choices, right? Because there's only 1 bit of information to shift. And so, and because you now know this one, and I think I knew, my last column was fixed by then, and so I knew there was no bar there and no bar here, and so this was at least a 7 letter word, and possibly 8. And so it turned out to be 8, and so on. So you kind of, it's a very beautiful idea. I like it a lot, that you construct the grid from these building blocks, and it's quite challenging, I imagine, for the setter, because you need to make sure that the grid is such that, you know, every 2x2 square in it, well, aligned, so every 2x2 square that is in the right place has exactly 1 bar. And this is precisely what's happening here. It still was quite surprisingly a lot of work after that, but I got there eventually, and I think this is what the final grid looks like. Again, I think I missed some of the bars here, and this is what I'm worried about in the puzzles like this mostly, is that it's just so easy to miss a bar placement when you copy over from where you solved it, and I solved it on paper. So finally, now for the end game, or so-called end game. So there are these G clues, and as you can see, the very first G clues goes, sun coming out, begin cutting. Now, one of the meanings of tart is cutting, and this is the more nice meaning than the other one. And so, and all of the answers in this G set, they have some not very nice meanings, or not very, how does Paddock put it, that might be considered unpleasant. So in the grid, they are with one letter misprints, and indeed, like here, there is a 4-letter entry that is Tate and not Tart, and so this is a misprint. Similarly, oh, now I realize there is one more bar missing. Where is that? Oh, there's more than one bar missing in this row. How did that happen? And I'm not sure yeah, so basically once you consider this pair, so this Tart Tate gives us a pair of letter R, I. And then, you know, if you look at some other 4-letter entries, you have here toil, and what do we have for toil? Tool, yeah, so tool and toil give us another I-O pair, and and similarly lash and bash give us an L and B pair, and so on. So once you get all the 12 letters, you could get a word Bowdlerizing out of it, and this describes, so there was this chap who was quite keen on not allowing any words with, let's read it again, possibly that might be considered unpleasant. And so he, for example, did this to Shakespeare, and so there's Bowdlerized editions of Shakespeare. And this is not the very the first puzzle I'm doing on the subject. There was an A grader in the Magpie a couple of years ago by Jacques, set around this theme, and I enjoyed that a lot. And here it looks a little bit artificial, in the sense that I really enjoyed the idea of constructing the grid from this 2x2 blocks. And I think it probably should have stopped here, because this whole idea of changing then the 4-letter entries to something more polite is orthogonal to the main idea of the puzzle. And I'm not sure how satisfying it is, because if we look at some of this, or let's say tool toil, right? What it says is that in the original grid, some of the words could be considered unpleasant, and so the G clues were written for them to avoid that. But if we try to put tool here, then suddenly this is not a word. And so why on earth like that? So the story sort of doesn't really hold up, I think. Yeah. After first constructing the grid, I found that 6 4-letter entries all had a meaning that might be considered unpleasant. But that grid is not really valid, right? Because it has a lot of non-words. So maybe this is just a problem of phrasing the preamble, but somehow it leaves, yeah, I don't know, like not a fan of that particular bit. Having said that, I really like the unusual puzzles, and this is certainly one of the more unusual listeners that appeared recently. So many thanks to Paddock for that, and let's see what next week is going to bring. Thank you for watching. Bye.